Hello, fourth graders and my fifth graders, if I am still teaching fifth grade at this point. Welcome to Death Valley National Park. This is a national park that is found mainly in California, and it's obviously known for it being really hot and deserty, hence the death part of Death Valley. I was looking at these mountains over here. What do you notice with these mountains? What do you see? And what do you wonder about them? What's cool about these mountains is you can see the layers of all the minerals that have been packed down over time to build up the mountain, which is really cool. There's light colors in some of the bands, there's dark colors and stripes, all sorts of colors, which is really cool. And you can see a little bit of the desert here. If you're not one of my students, I hope that you enjoy seeing Death Valley with us. Hello students, I am here at Zabriskie Point in Death Valley, and here they have a spot here about the borax mining in Death Valley. Within the lakebed deposits of Furnace Creek Formation are rich layers of colemanite and ulluxite, minerals used for borax, which most of you probably use borax to make your slime that you like to make. Although borax was first discovered in recrystallized form on the salt flats, these original minerals proved more profitable to mine. So starting in 1882, numerous mining claims were established near Ryan, 20, Mule Team Canyon, and Gower Gulch below Zabriskie Point. So nearby this location is where they started doing that mining. On this sign it's talking about from wasteland to wonderland. Mining comes and goes with fluctuating demand for minerals, but the draw of the desert is eternal. So by the 1920s, borax mining activity had slowed, and the Pacific Coast Borax Mining Company began looking for other uses for its holdings in Death Valley. So they started building an inn, and people started visiting here for vacation. And in 1993, it became a national monument and national park in 1994. So right now, I'm currently in a national park, which is Death Valley. Something cool that I noticed here at Zabriskie Point is that something happened here between these mountains and over there. What do you think would have caused this crack or this change to this mountain? The word that comes to mind is erosion, but what caused the erosion or the change in the mountain? Something to think about. Pretty cool. Welcome to the Furnace Creek Visitor Center. It is 103 degrees Fahrenheit today, 39 degrees Celsius. And it says here on the sign, every 1,000 feet higher is 5 degrees Fahrenheit cooler. So here's kind of the layers of where we're at today. Different layers and different temperatures and how it changes based on your elevation or how high or how low you are comparing to sea level. So Death Valley is where I'm located at, and Death Valley is the hottest place on Earth. It holds the world record for the hottest air temperature at 134 degrees. It's also very dry. Death Valley is the driest place in the United States, and it gets that distinction by having the lowest average annual rainfall of any place in the country, less than 2 inches per year, and some years there's no rain here at all. It's also one of the lowest places. Badwater Basin, which I'll probably be visiting soon, in the heart of Death Valley, is 282 feet below sea level. It's the lowest point in North America. Now you might be thinking, who would want to visit this place if it's the hottest, driest, lowest point in the United States and in the world? Who would want to come here? Now there are some positive things about coming here, is that they do have pleasant weather sometimes, abundant spring water like it's shown in this picture, and some high mountains, and some days are cool and crystal clear and some days are really hot. There's some snow in the mountains, so it can be a very nice place to visit if you come at the right time. And of course, with all California history, we are not the first people here. Of course, there were Native American people here first, which is amazing that they could survive in such harsh conditions. It says traditionally the Timbisha Shoshone spent summers in the mountains and stayed in the valley floor only during the cooler season, living in small communities near springs. For the Timbisha, caring for the land was always meant participating in its ecosystem. It meant clearing brush and removing excess plants from the springs to keep the streams flowing. It meant harvesting pinyon pine nuts, mesquite beans in a way that encourages new growth. It means stewarding the land and the springs that provided for the life of the valley. This here is a cradle board where they would keep their babies while they're doing different things. And then here's some other artifacts that they used. A basket. They'd use this to grind up different plants to eat and make things out of. Here's another type of basket. So it's pretty interesting seeing all the different things that they would use to survive, and the fact that they'd be up in the mountains where it's cooler during the summertime and come back down to the valley when it's cooler down here. Of course, since we're in the desert, animals had to get tough to survive, like be poisonous, grow thick skin, practice walking on hot rocks, learn to drink blood or brine to survive. Sometimes they had to cling to the past, like find a pocket of ancient past, linger there for thousands of years, and decide that the desert is an okay place for them. And sometimes they had to escape, grow a heat shield, tunnel underground, go dormant until the rains come. That means they go to sleep or hibernate. They leave and come back in better weather. So in the desert you can find a lot of examples of those. Here's a brown-eyed evening primrose. It says that it blooms in the low desert, but only in the cool of the night, so it doesn't really bloom when it's hot outside. Same with this desert 5-spot plant on the right side. It says that it is a lantern flower, and it directs insects towards the nectar and the pollen. So it brings in the insects so that they can pollinate it and spread it. So it's really cool learning about how different animals and creatures survive in such hard conditions. Here are some more Native American artifacts from Death Valley. It says that we are still here and that they want to keep their cultural heritage alive, and how they keep their customs alive with the new generations coming up. So some of these items are more newly made by Native Americans that are still alive today. Pretty cool. This is made all out of feathers, which is pretty amazing. Very nice. Also, Native Americans help in campaigning for land rights, so they still today protect the land that we live on and the land that they live on. That's why it's important to recognize that we are always on Native land and give them the respect that they deserve and learn about their history, so then that way we can help support them today. So in the desert, there's actually quite a bit of opportunities for water through springs that spring up through the ground, as well as aquatic ecosystems that are built in dry places. And that's how some people survive in the desert. There's ancient water with mineral springs fed by an aquifer. There's watering holes where animals rely on the water especially. And that's based on springs as well. So what kind of water? If the spring is located on the east side of Death Valley, larger, warm, or hot, mineralized, it's ancient water from the aquifer. If the spring is located in the mountain canyon, smaller, cool, fresh, it's modern water from mountain rains and snow. So it's interesting thinking about modern water from snow and the mountains versus ancient water from springs and other sources. Now, in one of my videos I filmed, I mentioned that there was some erosion, and it's important to think about how water shapes our desert. More than any other landscape, the desert is carved by water. The scarcity of water during most of the year gives each occasional flood fantastic power to sculpt and refashion the landscape. So you can see in these pictures here that the water can change how things look, which is fascinating. Now, Death Valley is known for mining borax. It says here that during the 1880s, Chinese workers did most of the hard physical labor at Harmony Borax Works. They only worked for $1.50 a day, and they scraped borax into windrows, shoveled it into hand carts, and then onto wagons for the works. The wages were lower than the wages of the white workers, so they were mistreated and discriminated against, sadly. And it says that they were housed at the refinery rather than at the ranch where the whites lived, so they were housed in a much less nicer place comparing to the white workers. Chinese immigrants were the migrant workers at the time. They faced discrimination and often open hostility, so people would just be racist towards them openly while they were helping to mine all this for their company. And it says, yet the items in this case show the Chinese borax workers held on to their cultural heritage and made time for music and games. So here's some of their instruments and games that they would play, and then here's some of the borax that they'd be mining to help provide borax for the United States, which people would use to clean especially. It was used as a cleaner. So just like the gold rush, there were prospectors here who were mining for different things. And it says here, as one local Native American observed, mostly they came in pairs without their women. This we thought was strange because they would be traveling by themselves. A persistent prospector might find a rich pocket of ore near the surface of where he was working, and he could work for modest profit, meaning that he didn't make a lot of money from mining that stuff. It says more often prospectors sold their claims to larger mining outfits. Either way, it was hardly an easy road to quick riches, and yet they became a master of their own life. They could do what they want. They were free from different constraints like an ordinary job where you have to go to work every day. They could do kind of what they wanted to, as long as they had enough money to survive or enough food. So it's pretty interesting how people used to live back then. Here is a mining pan that they would use to pan for gold and other ore and things like that. Here are like a coffee or teapot, kettle. They'd use this to store water in, so they have water on their trips. Here's an example of like a saddle. And those of you that play Fortnite would recognize that. That's a pickaxe, and there's a shovel right behind it too. So like I've mentioned, Death Valley used a lot of mining because of all the minerals that people could find. Here's an example of a quartz with a vein for gold inside. Here's the borax that they would mine to get cleaning supplies for people, cleaning their dishes and clothing and different things like that, which we now use for making slime. And then also talc, which is also used for cleaning purposes. And here's some other minerals that you can find here. Galena, copper, sulfur, which sulfur when it's hot and burns it smells stinky. Antimony. So yeah, those are some of the minerals and things that you can find here in Death Valley that people have been mining for hundreds of years. Now, Death Valley wasn't always a really nice place to stay like it is today. It was a land of peril. The Death Valley region was judged dangerously early in the history of Western exploration. With little knowledge of the valley's springs or the desert's food sources, early visitors saw only dry and barren land, and it was deadly for some people because you had to have enough food to survive and enough water. It says here the name Death Valley. Latecomers to the 1849 gold rush in California gave Death Valley its morbid name. Veering south to get around the snow-covered Sierra Nevada, some of the people stumbled into the desert where they lost most of their animals, wagons, each other, and oftentimes their lives. As the ill-fated Bennett Arkin party was finally led out over the Panamint Mountains by the rescuers John H. Roger and William Lewis Manley, one of them turned back and said, "Goodbye, Death Valley." So that's kind of how it got its name. Pretty crazy. I'm glad nowadays we have technology and water and cars and everything, because traveling with horses and wagons and things through here would be really hard considering how hot it is. So Death Valley is a national park, and it's the largest national park in the lowest 48 states. It's one of the biggest expanses of protected warm desert in the world, with 3 million acres of desert wilderness. So here's a map of just how big it is, and this is California here. But it's pretty amazing that they turned a desert into a national park. A national park is special because no one can touch it. The government owns it, and it's a safe place for animals, and you have to have a lot of approval to be able to build on this land, and to be able to travel onto it you have to pay money or have a state park, or a national park, pass. So it says when Death Valley National Monument was established in 1933, it was among the first to be chosen specifically for its desert characteristics. And it said here in 1944 is when it became the national park, so pretty cool. Here's some facts about it too. What's cool about the national park system and the state park system is that they have rangers that drive around and can help you if you need help. They also enforce the law to make sure no one is polluting the state park or national park. They also make sure that all the wildlife is safe and that we're safe. It's a pretty cool thing that they have park rangers here. Maybe that would be a cool job for you someday. Something to think about. Back in the old days, they used to have a TV show called Death Valley Days that at one point was hosted by Ronald Reagan, and he was in the episodes telling about stories from the Death Valley era when they were mining a lot here. And Ronald Reagan eventually became one of our presidents. Here are some of the miner lamps that they would use, the miners would use. And it says in the back here that candles were the earliest form of lighting used with underground miners, but eventually they got these ones that would use oil and burn that. So, pretty cool. There's also some other items here. Tally board, cap crimper for attaching blasting caps to fuse, and a gold miner's horn spoon. Pretty interesting. Here's some other things. Here are some more Native American baskets that were handmade with different designs by the Native Americans here in Death Valley. I like this one. It looks kind of like a lizard on the side, and they have butterflies and different designs. Here are some arrowheads that they have found here in Death Valley that Native Americans would use to hunt and also to protect themselves. Sometimes you can find these out in the dirt when you're digging, which is pretty interesting. Here are some leftovers of some stagecoaches from the era of mining here in Death Valley, which started after the Gold Rush era. Here's some other ones down here. That would be hard to ride in for long periods of time. Here's like a buggy that you would hook up horses to in the front. Here is a big train engine here in the front. I assume this is one of those coal-powered engines. Eventually, this became a big mode of transportation with the Transcontinental Railroad rather than using those wagons and stagecoaches. And they would put coal in there and burn the coal in order to have power and move on the rails. A lot like our technology we still use today because it's pretty efficient. It's not the best for the environment, but it does get your things where they need to be pretty quickly, but can be dangerous too. Here's an old steam tractor that they eventually used in 1894. It says that it would replace the 20 mule teams because they would use mules, 20 of them, to move things and to push things along, so that eventually they would use this tractor, a steam tractor, to move things along rather than relying on animals. But eventually it was abandoned at the mine in Death Valley, so now it's here. Here is one of those 20 mule team wagon trains. It would be pulled by 20 mules. It says it was used in 1885 to haul borax from the Death Valley to the Mojave, 165 miles, which would take 10 days. And it says the borax weighed 24 tons. The entire weight totaled 36.5 tons. So they'd have all the borax inside these wagons, and then they'd have water there at the end in order to give to the animals, the mules that they used. We are at the sand dunes in Death Valley, and it's pretty warm today. You can see all the sand and how smooth it is. If you look at it closely, you can actually see how the land can change over time. And you can probably hear the wind happening, so you can see how there's like little waves in the ground from the wind blowing the sand and making different designs in the hills and the dunes. So it's pretty interesting seeing how not only water changes the land in the desert, but also wind can change the land. There's Mr. Lacuna. Hi, Mr. Lacuna. Another cool thing about these sand dunes is that they filmed part of one of the Star Wars movies here, which makes sense because it does look very otherworldly when you're here. It looks very unique, like you're on another planet almost, which is kind of cool. Part of the fun of visiting the sand dunes is walking in the sand dunes. You can see my foot sinks in the sand with every step I take. So you want to wear Crocs on this kind of trip.
Gold.
Yes, also Mr. Lacuna's been digging through the dirt and there's little specks of gold everywhere. As we walk along you might see, I don't know if you can see, but there's little sparkly pieces everywhere and that's gold, which is pretty cool. So, hope you enjoyed seeing the sand dunes here in Death Valley. Something interesting in the desert is sometimes there's these little mini tornadoes called dust devils that form from the wind, making the dust and the dirt kind of twist around in the air. It's pretty interesting, and they don't last for too long though, and they don't cause too much damage, but it's pretty windy over there where that dust devil is right now. We are here close to the Artist Palette in Death Valley, and we've been looking at different types of rocks and how different rocks form from the mountains and look different based on what minerals are part of it. But we found this really cool rock that's made out of a bunch of little ones that must have been compressed together over time. You can see all the different colors and how it has an interesting shape that's really rough. Pretty cool looking at rocks here on the desert floor in Death Valley. Hello students, we are at the Artist Palette at Death Valley. It says that more than 5 million years ago, repeated volcanic eruptions blanketed the landscape, depositing ash and minerals. The volcanic minerals were chemically altered by heat and water with variable amounts of oxygen and other introduced elements. And because of that, all these layers and all these colors are made out of iron, aluminum, magnesium, and titanium, but no copper. Some of the colored minerals include red hematite and green chlorite. So if you look at it, there's lots of different colors going on here in these mountains. It's pretty interesting. Like there's some greens up there and some bluish colors, some red. Pretty cool. And it's called an artist palette because it's like a palette that an artist would use to paint with all the different colors. Hello students, I am still here at the Artist Palette and I noticed some more changes to the landscape. What do you think caused this to form all the way across? And no, it's not a road, it's not man-made. You can see people walking there. What caused this to happen in the midst of all these mountains? Well, the word that comes to mind, which I mentioned earlier in one of my other parts of my videos, is the word erosion. And erosion can happen from a few different things. It can happen because of people. It could happen because of different natural events like landslides, flooding, water moving from one place to another, wind. So what do you think caused this erosion to happen, this change in the land? So here we are at the Badwater Basin. It says here that the geographic region known as the Basin and Range is spreading apart, fracturing the Earth's crust along parallel fault lines. So fault lines are where some of the Earth's crust that forms plates crash into each other or pull apart, and that causes earthquakes. So it says that they are causing the parallel fault lines to fracture. So huge blocks of land between the faults tilt like seesaws as the extension continues. So pretty interesting. And even as the basins and ranges form, erosions wear down the mountains, and debris from the surrounding area washes into the basin since it has no outlet to the sea. But erosion cannot keep up with the geological forces that happen here. So pretty interesting. Here's what it looks like. Then here it talks about how it's the Earth's lowest location. Here it is, Badwater Basin, Death Valley, negative 282 feet below sea level. And then there's some other places too that are nearby, and also some places in other countries. But this is the lowest point. It's pretty cool how they compare different levels to each other and how this is the lowest point. What's crazy about the Badwater Basin is you can see all this salt and all these minerals and how bumpy everything is. You wouldn't want to walk on this, it'd cut your feet up. But there is also water here. So of course, sometimes water collects in the desert, and over time it might dry out, but sometimes it sticks around for a while. So here I am in front of the Badwater Pool of Water. It says that the water is rare and precious in Death Valley. Imagine this disappointment when a surveyor mapping this area could not get his mule to drink from this pool. And it says here that the water is not poisonous, it's just very, very salty. And it says that there's a presence of pickleweed, aquatic insects, and larvae. So some living creatures live in here, which is fascinating. And it comes from an ancient aquifer, so it fills the pool year-round. Pretty cool. So here at the Badwater Basin, it says that there's lots of salt crystals, and because of the salt crystals, they expand and it pushes the crust of salt into rough, chaotic forms. So it makes kind of different patterns and things on the ground, or as you can see, very bumpy rocks with sand. Well, it's not sand, it's salt all over the place. So it's pretty interesting in that it's an intense concentration, so there's lots of salt in one small area. It says that the crusts are fragile, meaning that you have to be very careful with them because they could break up. But also, because of how sharp everything is around here, you probably wouldn't want to walk on it anyway. Here is some of the salt that we found on the ground here at Badwater Basin. And this is salt from below sea level, so at one point there obviously was water here. It's pretty interesting how the salt is and how the whole ground and floor is covered in it. So I'm currently walking on the salt of Badwater Basin, and I wanted to get a close-up so you could see how the rocks are here too. They're very bumpy, lots of salt. Pretty interesting. Looks like something on another planet to me. Pretty cool.